Hi everyone, I've made some changes to my startup file for Blender, so we're just going to talk a bit about it. There aren't many changes this time, but this is available on Gumroad and also for my $10 patrons because it's technically, quote unquote, a product. And I know a lot of people like it because it kind of gives them a bit of a window into like my professional workflow of Blender. Obviously, it's very customizable, so I know what some people do is they'll get the file and then, close a bunch of editors they don't want, maybe delete the workspaces they don't like because I've designed these entirely around my own preference. Maybe they make some adjustment to the default lighting. For this version, there's a little bit to talk about regarding outputs for animation because I've been doing animation type work recently. So we'll talk about the full process behind that. So the reason why this is a paid resource is because, originally I wasn't really going to keep my startup file updated online for people. Then a few years ago, I needed to raise some money for an ophthalmology related issue, basically private consultations, all that. So I put it up on Gumroad. I think it's about $20, which is quite expensive for a startup file. But over the years, now that there's so many versions of the file and they all contain different things. So like there's one that contains, you might remember the alien embryo project to do with like geometry proximity for shading. There's more samples of the afterglow product like in earlier files. And over time, it's become a bit more refined. So we're looking at the 5.1.1 version. But a side note for the gold members watching, if you go to the product access collection, you should be able to find Blender startup file on there. Scroll down to the attachments on there. If you're looking for the file that's got 5_1_1 or 511 or 5.1.1, whatever I've named it, that's the one we're going to be looking at. And the theme is also available in there. It's the steel theme. The naming convention for that has also changed over time. All right, so what's changed? First of all, if you've got a very keen eye, you may know that the lighting has slightly changed as well. So I'm obviously very cycles focused with my work because a lot of my work is very much reliant on physically present balanced lighting, hence afterglow. I removed the back light that was originally present, kind of removed the front and back rings around, kept the upper one to get a kind of nicer, slightly moodier lighting setup that I think is a bit more balanced overall. Suzanne is now front and center, but there's also a sphere, just if you want to kind of see how the lighting wraps around it. So even if nothing else, if you use nothing else in this, it's just a great place to start in terms of like doing renders, particularly for sculpts. But that's not even what's kind of most important here. If we look up in the upper right, we'll see that there's been a bit of a naming convention change based on something that I've learned recently from the last video doing the laser lighting experiments, which would be this experiment. As you can see here, we've got the laser light. If you haven't watched that tutorial, it's pretty cool. We also talked about hiding information in light. So you notice that we're cutting between a few clips here, and these are all rendered from the same file. One thing I noticed that I wanted pretty quickly was when I'm doing quick animation renders from a blend file, I want the output file name to indicate like what camera it came from. Now there are multiple ways to do that. If we look over at the output settings here and the rendering, you can see it says shot 2, which is not the right name for the camera, but obviously you could type it in, or there are different tags you can add into the string field there that automatically insert data, but I don't think camera name is one of them. So I've got a script down here generated with ChatGPT, just a quick one-off script. What it does is whatever the active camera is, when I run this, it's going to change the output name to the name of the active camera. So that way I can just press to run the script and then Control 12 and it will render the animation. If I swap to another camera, press the script, Control 12, etc., etc. So if you're doing a bunch in a row, you get the naming convention right. Now, there are probably other smoother ways to do that. For example, you can do a little script that just attaches like a little operation that runs automatically before an animation is rendered. I tried that. It didn't work every time. It was finicky. It was annoying. So I just thought, sorry, I'll just do this as a helper script. So basically, I've got this little script down here now, and it's collapsed down there basically just so the button is accessible. So I can work in the file, move to whatever camera I want, click, and then I'll render the animation myself. You might ask, why not just have it render the animation at the end of the Python file? Because if you run the render animation operator that way, all of Blender will hike. It will basically freeze until the entire animation is done, which is not great because then you can't track visually the progress. Obviously, if you're doing this in a more professional way, you wouldn't even really want Blender open when you're doing the rendering because it's prone to having issues when you do that. I've also moved away from using the custom resolution add-on, which is, by the way, brilliant. And I still think resolution should be on a per camera basis by default in Blender anyway. However, when rendering animations with Blender open with custom resolution enabled for the camera, I noticed it consistently crashing after a few minutes of rendering. So with that in mind, I've now got it disabled by default, which is a bit annoying, but whatever. You may also notice now that the resolution has changed by default again, because this is kind of designed around my custom workflow. For the shorts that I'm doing, I am targeting an ultra wide resolution. So we've got 5120 by 2160. So that's now the default resolution. However, another little trick that I've been doing And by the way, this is quite a revelation for me, even though it's quite simple. The idea of rendering straight to video was something I liked when I started with Blender, then I moved away from because, you lose data very easily if Blender crashes, or at least you did because it was rendered to an MP4 format. And when you're rendering image frames, frame by frame, it's very easy to see where you got up to. The thing is, it's still just a little bit inconvenient doing so many image frames. It's a lot of files to move back and forth. I noticed recently that reducing my render resolution to something like 30% and turning down the samples. So at the moment the samples are on 200, but I tend to do 50. So 30% resolution, 50 samples. Maybe I should just show you. If I render out the animation, you can see how quickly this is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now again, it's not really Ultra HD because we turn the resolution down. But the thing is, if you then scale that up to an Ultra HD workspace, like if I'm in DaVinci Resolve, assuming that we have denoise active, so what I'm going to do is just activate denoise and rename this to shot 1D. You can now see in the output shot 1D. So I've got my denoise mix node here, which is a custom node that will denoise it by 80%. Now I'm going to render this. So let's do 10 frames of this. So we can see how quickly it's going. So it's still doing the denoise comping afterwards, you just won't see it visually. Okay, let's cancel that there. Also, side note, because they changed the video output default in Blender from MP4 to MKV, it means that if Blender crashes, you don't lose the data. The video just ends where it got up to. So now we've got our noisy output here, and now denoised. Now, one thing you should think about here is that it is so fast rendering the 30% resolution, and the denoising already covers so much of the noise that when you scale it back up to full res, people do not care. If it's not a final output, let's just have a look on Instagram here, people don't care. So this is the low res version, right? And actually, interestingly, here's where I was testing that multi-shot system where, you rename the camera, etc. There's actually different resolutions occurring in this one. So most of the shots are low res. In fact, the very first one is a slightly higher res. Bit cleaner, swaps to lower res. I guarantee you, never even crosses anyone's mind. So it can literally take just, a couple of minutes, a few minutes per animated shot while sitting inside of the blend file. So before, I always had this thing hanging over my head that was, oh, do you really want to render out an animation because it's going to have all these issues in it and people are going to be concerned about it? And now I'm just thinking, who cares? Unless it's the actual final video, like if I'm, doing the final animated short for something, then I will punch out the resolution of samples. But if it's just social posts and YouTube experiments, which is most of what I'm kind of doing anyway, then why render full res? Side note, if you do use the denoise mix node, remember to unplug it or kind of make sure that your compositor is disabled depending on how you're doing it. I just tend to plug it and unplug it when I need it. So I'm the kind of artist that likes, fast feedback and rapidly prototyping. So what I'd have is I've got a DaVinci Resolve workspace, which is a bit like a mood board, but it's the actual editing space for the larger animated projects, right? The kind of stuff where I can't really show you exactly what's on there. Otherwise, we'd be in DaVinci now. But I am thinking about maybe doing some kind of project template that I can share with people, because I've had to make a lot of changes to that over time, and you might find it useful. But what I do is I take each of those shots from the camera that only took like a couple of minutes to render. I line them up in the timeline. I can edit them however I want. And because it's easy to substitute clips in Resolve, I could have pieces of a single clip everywhere. And if I think I want that one to be slightly higher res, I just jump back into the blend file, up the resolution, change the name. It can overwrite the original video file, render that out, and then DaVinci should update the resolution for it. Or you just do the clip replace. So basically the theory is that now, instead of trying to aim for high resolution outputs, I'm starting as low as possible, editing from that low resolution version, which I guess you could call a proxy, but it's not really a proxy because it's not substituting for any other data because the data doesn't exist. And then as and when required, that low resolution footage is rendered to a higher resolution state afterwards, but only if needed. But the fun thing about that is it means that you can get everything. Like there's no waiting for something. It's so quick to render. You could render an entire short film out in a day, provided you were sitting there managing the process. And of course, I may well write some extra scripts to automate that. But yeah, it's just much more fun now. So that's why I've kind of changed things this way in the startup file. It's much more video focused rather than image slice focused. I believe by default, it will probably still be on 100% resolution just so people don't get confused when they try and render with the file. But that's typically what I do now. Video output, 30% resolution, 50 sample, maybe I'll up that depending on what the actual scene is because, volumes, etc. And then I use the 80% denoise mix from the compositor. Oh, another thing is persistent data. Did I turn that on? I might have forgot to turn that on. Okay, so persistent data is another thing thing that will speed up the rendering process, because it means that you don't have to like recalculate or rebuild the BVH. That might not be correct. They maintain some data between frames. So what I'm actually going to do now is just go in and set that. There you go, persistent data, save, and I will get this re-uploaded. So that will be ready for people. Now, is there anything else I haven't mentioned? Helper script, lighting change, rename cameras to shots, how I prepare video outputs. The bloom, the threshold has been significantly reduced because I tend to work from a low threshold bloom anyway, but you may not like that depending on what kind of scenes you're doing. I think that's about it. So again, my Blender startup file, including my theme, the steel theme, is available on Gumroad or for the $10 patrons, which get access to every product of mine, which by the way, I recommend checking that out. It's not a replacement for Gumroad. It's just another way of getting everything. You can access all of my products, $10 a month. You can tap in and out however you like. You get the rights to use them while your period is active. So that includes Afterglow, modular workspaces, etc., etc., etc. If you wanted to try something, but you didn't really want to commit to buying it fully, then the gold tier on Patreon is a good way to be able to test everything if you want to give it a try. And like I said, this startup file is included on there, as well as all the other ones in the package. And Hexscatter. Hexscatter's on there as well. All right, so thanks for watching, everyone. Stay safe. Oh, we haven't done this in a while. If you made it to the end, put a unicorn emoji. That was our default. Put a unicorn emoji in the comments. If you're on Windows, you can press the Windows key and the period key to open an emoji keyboard. Little tip for you. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.